The isolation of Fjord. It was the year 2015, and I had always been drawn to the remote and unforgiving landscape of Norway's western coast. As a geologist, I had spent years studying the unique tectonic features of this region, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold in the tiny village of Fjord. I arrived in Fjord on a crisp autumn morning, the air biting and cold as I stepped off the bus that had brought me from Bergen. The villagers looked up from their daily routines, their faces set with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. They knew little about outsiders, and I was no exception. As I settled into my small cabin on the outskirts of town, the silence began to take hold. It's a sound that's both deafening and crushing, like an endless expanse of ice and snow weighing down upon you. The villagers were a hardy bunch, but even they couldn't shake off the feeling of isolation that hung over Fjord like a shroud. I spent my days studying the local geology, poring over samples and running tests in the small lab I had set up. But it was at night, when the darkness seemed to press in around me, that I began to feel the weight of something else, a presence, a feeling that I couldn't quite explain. It started with small things, a creaking floorboard, an unexplained draft from the window, a faint whisper in the wind. At first, I wrote it off as the product of a restless mind and too much time alone. But as the occurrences grew more frequent and more intense, I began to suspect that something was very wrong indeed. It started on the morning of October 12th, a day that would change everything in Fjord forever. I had spent the previous night huddled around my laptop, poring over maps and satellite images of the fjord's ice front. The villagers were busy with their daily routines, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a cold blanket. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed a change in the air. The wind seemed to pick up, carrying with it a faint scent of salt and ice. The villagers looked up from their chores, their faces squinting against the growing gusts, and that's when I saw it. A massive crack had opened up in the ice front, like a jagged mouth yawning open to devour everything in its path. The villagers rushed out into the storm, their voices carrying on the wind as they warned each other of the danger. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, as the ice began to break away from the shore. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a shimmering wall of blue-green ice that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. As the villagers watched in horror, the crack grew wider, and the iceberg began to break off, its massive bulk plunging into the depths of the fjord. The sound was like thunder, shaking the very foundations of my cabin. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling with the implications of what I was seeing. It was then that I felt it, a presence, a feeling that something was stirring beneath the surface of the water. It was as if the gods themselves had awakened from their slumber and were now stirring the pot of chaos in our small village. I knew then that my life would never be the same again. The break-off had unleashed a power that threatened to consume us all, and I was about to find out that some secrets were better left buried beneath the ice. As the days passed, I settled into a routine that was both familiar and unsettling. The villagers went about their daily lives, seemingly oblivious to the growing sense of unease that hung over Fjord like a shroud. They were a hardy bunch, adapted to the harsh conditions of the fjord, but even they couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Every creak of the wooden bridge, every snap of a twig, made them jump with a mixture of fear and fascination. I tried to join in on their conversations, to learn more about this strange and isolated community, but they seemed wary of me, like a wild animal eyeing its new territory. The children played alone, their laughter carrying on the wind as they chased each other around the rocky shores. But even their joy seemed tinged with a hint of sadness, a sense that something was missing from their lives. The women went about their daily chores, their faces set in determined lines as they worked to keep their families safe and fed. They spoke little of themselves, but I caught glimpses of a deep-seated fear in their eyes, a fear of the unknown that seemed to grow with each passing day. And then there was the old man who sat alone on his porch, watching the world go by with a gaze that seemed both piercing and haunted. He spoke little, but when he did, it was like a rusty gate creaking open, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to get close to him, to learn more about this enigmatic figure, but he would nod curtly and turn away, leaving me feeling both intrigued and intimidated. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice strange occurrences around Nærøyfjord. Tools would go missing from the villagers' homes, only to reappear in odd places. Fishermen would report seeing shadowy figures lurking just beneath the surface of the water. And then there were the dreams, vivid, disturbing visions that seemed all too real. I would wake up in the dead of night, my heart pounding, with an image etched into my mind like a brand. A figure with eyes that glowed like embers from the underworld, its face twisted in a snarl of rage and hatred. The villagers seemed to be experiencing these strange occurrences as well, but they downplayed them, attributing them to the usual causes: the wind, the weather, the usual suspects. But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones, a growing sense of unease that seemed to seep into every pore of my being. And then there were the whispers, soft, raspy whispers that seemed to carry on the wind, speaking words that made no sense. Fimbulwinter, they would say over and over like a mantra. Fimbulwinter, the end times, the great winter of darkness. I tried to brush it off as mere superstition, but the words stuck in my mind like a festering wound. It was then that I realized Nærøyfjord was not just a village. It was a nexus, a crossroads of ancient powers and forgotten lore, and I was beginning to suspect that I had stumbled into something much bigger than myself. The old man's name was Gunnar, and he was a keeper of secrets. I had seen him watching me from across the fjord, his eyes piercing through the mist like a pair of cold steel daggers. One day, as I walked along the shore, he beckoned me to come closer. His voice was low and gravelly, like the rumble of stones in an ancient well. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his words dripping with warning. "This place is not for mortals." I felt a shiver run down my spine as he spoke, but I stood my ground, intrigued by the secrets he might reveal. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gunnar's eyes seemed to bore into mine like he was searching for something hidden deep within me. "The gods are stirring," he said, his voice heavy with foreboding. "Fimbulwinter is coming and all the world will burn." I laughed, thinking it was just an old man's ramblings, but Gunnar's face turned grim, his eyes flashing with a warning that made my heart skip a beat. "You would do well to heed my words," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "The fire giant Surtur will come from the south, and all of Norhaven will be consumed." I felt a chill run down my spine as he spoke, but I still didn't believe him. That was when I saw it, a dark shape on the horizon, like a shadow cast by the gods themselves. It was moving slowly, steadily towards us, and I knew that Gunnar's warning was not just an old man's ramblings. Fimbulwinter was real, and it was coming for us. I tried to warn the villagers of the impending doom, but they just laughed it off as an old man's ramblings. But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones, a growing sense of unease that seemed to seep into every pore of my being. And then, one day, I saw her, Olga, the young daughter of the village elder. She was out gathering herbs in the forest when she stumbled upon something strange. A dark shape, like a shadow cast by the gods themselves, had appeared out of nowhere. At first she thought it was just a rabbit or a deer, but as she looked closer, she realized it was something much more sinister. It was Surtur's servant, a creature from the fire giant's realm. Olga tried to run, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. The creature began to move towards her, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I watched in horror as Olga screamed and screamed, but no one came to her aid. It was then that I realized that Fimbulwinter had truly begun. The villagers were being chosen, one by one, for the fire giant's wrath, and Olga was just the first victim. I tried to run to her aid, but it was too late. The creature engulfed her in flames, and she disappeared into the darkness. The villagers gathered around me, their faces filled with shock and horror. They knew that something was wrong, something ancient and evil had come to their doorstep, and they knew that they were next. I spent the rest of the day investigating the forest where Olga was last seen. I talked to the other villagers, trying to piece together what had happened. They all seemed shaken, but no one knew anything about the creature or its origins. I decided to search the area myself, hoping to find some clues that might lead me to Surtur's servant. As I walked through the forest, I noticed strange symbols etched into the trees. They looked like a mix of ancient runes and hieroglyphs, and they seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent energy. I followed the symbols, tracing them back to a clearing deep in the woods. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone pedestal, and on top of it sat a small, leather-bound book. The cover was made from what looked like human skin, and the pages seemed to be written in blood. I opened the book, and a musty smell wafted out. As I flipped through the pages, I saw that they were filled with incantations and rituals. It was clear that this was no ordinary book. It was a tome of dark magic. Suddenly, I heard a faint whispering in my ear. "Welcome, investigator," it said. "We've been expecting you." I spun around, but there was no one there. The whisper seemed to come from all around me, echoing off the trees. I knew then that I had stumbled into something much bigger than myself, a world of ancient powers and dark magic, and I was determined to uncover the truth behind Surtur's servant and the haunting of Norhaven. I spent the rest of the day poring over the book, trying to understand the incantations and rituals that were scrawled across its pages. As I delved deeper into the text, I began to uncover a dark history that seemed to be connected to Surtur's servant. According to the book, the creature was once a human who had been consumed by the fire giant's power. It had been bound to serve Surtur for eternity, and its sole purpose was to bring destruction and chaos to the world. But as I read on, I realized that there was more to the story than just simple mythological tales. The book spoke of an ancient civilization that had once thrived in Norhaven, a people who had possessed knowledge and power beyond anything I could imagine. They had built towering cities and harnessed the very fabric of reality itself. But as time went on, they began to forget their true nature and their connection to the world around them. They became corrupted by their own power, and eventually they were consumed by it. The book hinted that Surtur's servant was one of these lost souls, a creature who had been born from the ashes of the ancient civilization and was now determined to bring about its downfall. As I closed the book, I knew that I had uncovered a piece of the puzzle, but there was still so much more to learn. I decided to pay a visit to the village elder, hoping to glean some information from him. He listened intently as I told him what I had discovered, and when I finished, he nodded gravely. "You're right," he said. "The book is telling the truth." He paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. "Surtur's servant is not just a simple creature, it's a harbinger of doom. It's a sign that the end times are upon us, and that we must prepare ourselves for the coming battle. I felt a chill run down my spine as he spoke, but I knew that I had to keep going. I had to uncover the truth behind Surtur's servant and the haunting of Norhaven, and I was determined to do whatever it took to stop it. I had barely finished speaking with the village elder when a sudden gust of wind swept through the village, extinguishing the torches and plunging us into darkness. The air was filled with an eerie, otherworldly energy, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. And then, out of nowhere, a brilliant light illuminated the sky. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a shimmering, iridescent glow that seemed to pulse with an inner power. As we watched in awe, a figure began to take shape within the light. It was a woman, tall and statuesque, with skin as white as marble and hair as black as night. Her eyes burned with an inner fire, and her presence was like a thunderclap on a summer's day. She wore a gown that seemed to be woven from the very fabric of the stars themselves, and it shimmered and shone like the sun. As she descended upon us, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, as if all my fears and worries had been washed away by her presence. The woman spoke in a voice that was like music, her words echoing in my mind long after she had finished speaking. "I am Freyja, goddess of love and war," she said, "and I have come to Norhaven to put an end to the suffering that has plagued this village for so long." As she spoke, a sense of calm descended upon us, as if the very fabric of reality itself had been altered by her presence. The air seemed to vibrate with an inner power, and I could feel my heart beating in time with hers. And then, in an instant, it was over. Freyja vanished as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving behind only a faint whisper of her presence like the echo of a bell on a distant shore. The villagers looked at me in wonder, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and confusion. What did it all mean? I knew that I would never forget this moment, this glimpse into a world beyond our own. And as I watched them return to their daily routines, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, as if the gods themselves were on our side. I had barely processed what had just happened when I heard a loud, rumbling noise coming from outside the village. It was like thunder, but it seemed to be getting closer and closer. I looked up at the sky, expecting to see dark clouds gathering, but instead, I saw Surtur's servant emerging from the forest. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its presence seemed to fill the air with an unspeakable horror. The villagers cowered in fear, but I stood my ground, determined to confront the darkness head-on. I knew that I had to stop Surtur's servant before it was too late. As I approached the creature, I could feel its power washing over me like a wave of ice-cold water. It reached out a hand towards me, and I raised my own, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The air seemed to vibrate with tension as we faced off against each other, our wills locked in a struggle that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. And then, in an instant, everything changed. Surtur's servant spoke in a voice that was like a scream in my mind. "You are no match for me," it said. "I am the bringer of darkness and despair." I knew that I had to think fast if I was going to defeat this creature. I remembered the words of Freyja, goddess of love and war, and how she had imbued me with a sense of hope and determination. I focused on those feelings, letting them burn within me like a fire. And then, in a burst of inspiration, I knew exactly what to do. I reached out my own hand and touched Surtur's servant, feeling the power of the gods flowing through me like a river of light. The creature let out a scream of rage as it felt its own power being drained away, and for a moment, it seemed to stumble backwards under my touch. And in that moment, I knew that I had won. But as I stood there, basking in the glow of victory, I realized that the true battle was far from over. The darkness was still out there, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. and I knew that I would have to face it again, sooner or later. As the days passed, the village of Norhaven began to feel a sense of unease. It was as if the very fabric of reality was starting to unravel. The villagers would often wake up in the dead of night to find that their doors were open, and the air was filled with an eerie, unsettling energy. They would try to shake off the feeling, telling themselves it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. But deep down, they knew it was more than that. Something was trying to get through, something that had been kept at bay for far too long. I could feel it in my bones, a creeping sense of dread that seemed to seep into every pore. And then, one night, the veil finally thinned. It was as if the very fabric of reality had torn apart, revealing a glimpse of what lay beyond. I stood at the edge of the village, looking out into the darkness, and saw it. A figure, tall and imposing, standing just beyond the tree line. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its presence seemed to fill the air with an unspeakable horror. The villagers cowered in fear, but I stood my ground, frozen in place. I knew that I had to confront whatever was out there, no matter what lay ahead. As I watched, the figure began to move towards me, its pace slow and deliberate. I could feel its eyes on me, boring into my very soul. And then, just as it reached out a hand towards me, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying in my bed, surrounded by the familiar comforts of my home. But something felt off. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, and I could sense that something was watching me from the shadows. I knew that I had seen something that night, something that would change everything. And as I lay there trying to make sense of it all, I heard a voice whispering in my ear. "The veil has thinned," it said, "and now nothing will ever be the same again." As I lay there trying to make sense of it all, I knew that my journey had only just begun. I had uncovered a dark secret, one that threatened the very fabric of our world, and now I was determined to see it through to the end. I threw off the covers and stood up, feeling a sense of purpose that I had never felt before. The villagers were gathered outside, their faces filled with a mix of fear and determination. They knew what was at stake, and they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. Together, we set out on a journey to uncover the truth about Surtur's servant, to stop it from bringing about a catastrophic reckoning. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to see it through. And as we walked, the air seemed to fill with an otherworldly energy, as if the very gods themselves were watching over us. We journeyed for days, facing countless challenges and obstacles along the way. But I never wavered, driven by a sense of purpose that I had never felt before. And finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we reached the heart of the forest. There, standing tall and proud, was Surtur's servant. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its presence seemed to fill the air with an unspeakable horror. But I stood my ground, ready to face whatever lay ahead. And in that moment, everything changed. The creature spoke, its voice like a scream in my mind. "You have come to stop me," it said, "but you are too late." And with that, the world went white. When I came to, I was lying on the forest floor, surrounded by the familiar comforts of my home. But something felt off. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, and I could sense that something was watching me from the shadows. I knew that I had seen something that day, something that would change everything. And as I lay there, trying to make sense of it all, I realized that my journey had only just begun. The veil had been thinned, and now nothing would ever be the same again.